Wade in the Water, our racial justice ministry here at Grace Episcopal Church, really began back in 2016. There were a couple of us who were noticing in our really wonderful congregation that we go to church and we would see and sit among a racially and otherwise diverse congregation. And while there were pockets of connection and community, we would basically get up and separate. And so we were curious about that and felt like a disconnect that, didn't really fit within our feeling of community and in a faith community. And so began by actually having conversations amongst our parish, asking questions around what do you feel about racial diversity? What do you feel about racism? Just really probing and wondering, like, what do you think could happen within Grace Church to address these issues? How do we build community across lines of race? And that was the beginning of finding out what our congregation was really longing for.
So those early conversations, we called them storytelling, truth-telling, and it was a really good way to get to know different people in the congregation. At the end of it, they walked away with, oh, I didn't know X, Y, and Z, or just because you're a Black woman, I would have put you into this box, right? Made some assumptions about you, but my life may be very different from what you have assumed. Or just because you're so-and-so, or you look a certain way on the outside, I made some assumptions about you, but you have a very different lived experience than I anticipated or I assumed. So that was really fascinating. We got a lot of positive feedback around that. And we got good feedback around the trainings too, that when we had facilitators come in and really just give people foundational information about race, about institutional racism, structural racism, just how this community, the redlining, the fact that Silver Spring was a sundown town, say that fast.
We've had conversations about how to talk about race with your children, race and racism with your children. We've created curriculum around the civil rights movement during Black History Month. Looking at, for Sunday school, the Children's March, where it was during the civil rights movement, it was really about children who really shifted everything, and the power of children in making change.
This is the third church building of Grace Episcopal Church. And as the third church building, there's quite a history there. You're driving up or down Georgia Avenue, you could see this Confederate marker on the little hill. It was on top of a burial site for 17 Confederate soldiers. During 2020, after the murder of George Floyd, the marker itself was vandalized. It was a tall marker, and it was pushed and spray painted, so it was almost toppled. At that time, as a church, we decided to go the next step and actually remove the marker. But it took until 2020 for our church to actively do something about it. The process wasn't easy, but we were able to get rid of it. And in addition to that, we had in one of our stained glass windows, we had a Confederate general. Actually, it was a person who really historically, as we've looked at our church history, didn't really have much to do with the church, but for somehow it was memorialized in our stained glass windows with a Confederate flag, we took the opportunity again to remove that pain and had a time as a church to think about how do we replace that. So it took us probably 2 or 3 years to think about how we replace that. And we were able to replace it with a wonderful representation of Mr. Broadnax. He was one of our parishioners, very active with our acolytes and our youth ministry, but more importantly, he was historically one of the Tuskegee Airmen. God said, love your neighbor as yourself. So how are we going to love our neighbor as ourselves if we don't actively talk through the issues that have divided us for so long? How do we live into our Christian faith, live into becoming our beloved community if we are not centering these conversations? It's one thing to go to church and just go to church and never have a conversation with your neighbor, don't know anything about them. But it's a totally different thing to go to church, understand who your neighbor is, their background, their history, and how you can help them or they can help you in your time of need, etc. So it's all about centering our Christian faith in all of the values we're supposed to espouse as Christians.